A political shocker this morning, and first on CNN, Liz Cheney, Dick's daughter, is dropping her bid for the U.S. Senate. In a statement, Cheney says, quote, "Serious health issues have recently arisen in our family, and under the circumstances, I have decided to discontinue my campaign." Now, it's unclear what those health issues are, but we do know Cheney's campaign was not going well. She alienated Wyoming voters over residency issues and alienated her own sister when she came out against same-sex marriage. Liz's sister Mary is gay and married. CNN's national political reporter Peter Hanby broke that story. Also with me, Rouse Douthat, a political commentator for CNN and columnist for the New York Times, and Marc Lamont Hill, who is also a CNN political commentator, and he also writes for the Huffington Post. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, that was not a very excited thank you, and I'm excited to be
It's the negative 47 degrees.
Okay, I'll take that. I understand. Peter, I want to start with you. Do we know who's ill in the Cheney family?
We don't yet, and that's sort of the big question that we have at the moment. She did make a reference to her children in the statement that she released. She has 5 children, daughters and sons, but we do not know the real reason that she, has decided to drop out of the race, other than citing these sort of personal concerns. And as you mentioned, I mean, personal concerns have been thrust in the spotlight throughout this campaign. That dispute she had with her sister Mary over same-sex marriage played out in full view of the media. Mary went on Facebook. Liz was on Fox News, and Dick Cheney came out with a statement in the course of this saying that it was his family felt pained, that this dispute was playing out in the public. So the personal life has really overshadowed the campaign throughout, so perhaps it's fitting that it comes to an end this way, Carol.
Yeah, well, Mark, you heard Peter. Cheney was not doing well in the polls. Some accused her of being a carpetbagger. Others were upset she threw her own sister under the bus when she came out against same-sex marriage. Is this surprising in light, though, of who her father is? Shouldn't the Cheney name carry weight?
Well, that's a real interesting question. I mean, yes, technically back home, Dick Cheney represented Wyoming in Congress for 6 terms, but Liz Cheney really came of age and grew up in Washington and Virginia. She only moved back to Wyoming in 2012, and there was this flap about her fishing license, which seems like a minor thing last year, but that sort of brought this back into the spotlight because she apparently illegally obtained a fishing license because she hadn't lived in Wyoming for a year, which is what you need to do to get one of those licenses. So this is sort of like brought attention back to the fact that she was, quote unquote, a carpetbagger. And this was what her opponents in the race were sort of drawing attention to, that she wasn't from Wyoming. And she actually also ran a campaign ad stressing her family roots in Wyoming. But to others, that kind of seemed like she was trying too hard. If you're actually from Wyoming, you don't need to go on TV and put your family in a TV ad and say, hey, I'm from Wyoming, I'm from Wyoming. So this is a real problem for her. And the incumbent senator, Mike Enzi, really seemed to have an advantage. There weren't a lot of public polls in the race, but most GOP insiders really watching this campaign suspected that Enzi really had a pretty strong institutional advantage and a popular advantage, even though we didn't see that too many polls.
So Ross, I was wondering, does this debacle, and some might describe it like that, does the Cheney name lose some luster because of this?
Well, it was always a very strange campaign because, Liz Cheney was basically trying to run the kind of outsider-based, sort of Tea Party-driven grassroots campaign that we've seen run very successfully in a lot of states against incumbent senators, especially long-serving incumbent senators in the Republican Party. But on the one hand, as we've been talking about, she wasn't really an outsider in any meaningful sense, and she has the Cheney name, one of the most famous names in Republican politics. Her issue, in some sense, was that she was too much of an insider, being associated with Washington, D.C. But then there was also the fact that it wasn't always clear what issues she was running on. And part of the reason there was such a flap over the same-sex marriage issue was that, a lot of people assumed that she had sort of pivoted to a more conservative position on that issue in an effort to be more in tune with Wyoming's primary electorate. But mostly it just highlighted the fact that, Mike Enzi, while I think perhaps a mediocrity in certain ways, is hardly a sort of moderate or squishy senator. And Liz Cheney's main sort of issue area is foreign policy, where she's extremely hawkish, extremely interventionist, and that isn't a perspective that actually plays that well with the Republican base right now. I mean, this is more the age of Rand Paul, where if you're running from the right in a Republican primary, you probably don't want to be associated with the Bush-Cheney foreign policy record. So it was always a kind of muddled campaign, and you know, it's surprising that it ended this way specifically, but it's not surprising that it didn't end in victory.
Interesting. Okay, so you bring up issues as they apply to the Republican Party. And Mark, this question's for you. After that bruising 2012 election and a pledge to broaden their focus, I'm talking about Republicans here, it seems the party may be trying to shore up their base because some RNC members, including the RNC chair, are set to participate in the annual March for Life during their winter meeting in January. Smart move?
Well, it's an interesting thing here, right? On the one hand, the Republican Party is attempting to shore up its base. It's attempting to hold on to its fundamental core principles, whatever those are. At the other end, they do these autopsies where they decide that they need to widen the tent, where they need to not rely on ideological purity in order to push a campaign or push a particular candidate. And as a result, you see this internal tension. I think the idea of pausing and having and honoring a March for Life actually makes sense if that is in fact where your ideology is positioned. But I think they have to be very careful not to reassert themselves and re-articulate themselves as the very thing they've been running from, which is a party that won't expand, that won't move with the times, that won't speak to the interests and ideologies of younger members of its party. And that's why, again, you see like a Liz Cheney campaign sort of flutter out, because once again, she's not representing anything different. She's running against the establishment at the very same time that she, in many ways, is the establishment. And people are happy with the establishment in the state.
Well, let's go back to the RNC, because I just want to be clear. The RNC is having its meeting in January, and that's when this big pro-life rally is scheduled for. So actually, the RNC is setting aside a few hours so its members can attend that pro-life rally. So
I don't understand why this is even a story, frankly. I mean, this is not a case of the RNC staking out some kind of, you know, putting out a press release saying, you know, everything Todd Akin said was amazing and, you know, we need to be even more pro-life than ever before. This is a case of the Republican National Committee, which represents the half of the country that opposes abortion, roughly speaking, letting its members participate in a march that happens every year on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, and frankly isn't a terribly partisan affair to begin with. I mean, it's very ideological in the sense that it's clearly anti-abortion, but it's not a sort of, you know, Republican rally in the first place. So, frankly, this seems to be more a case of sort of the media wanting to wag its finger at Republicans and say, you know, look, you're paying attention to your base. Of course they're going to pay attention to their base.
Exactly.
And, you know, the challenge...
But I do think it's a public gesture, though. I do think it's a very deliberate public gesture to show that while we're trying to expand our tent, we're not abandoning a particular tradition of Republican thinking.
I agree, but it's the kind of gesture that a political party has to make. I mean, it's no different from a Democratic Party saying, well, we need to reach out to the center, you know, but we're also going to continue to stand for the principles that we've always stood for. It's a balancing act, and not, I think, a terribly controversial move in that balancing act.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm going to look at my...
Right. I mean, both parties have to
Can you guys pause just a second? I'm going to look at my email box because we have a bit of breaking news coming in from the Supreme Court. Let me just look at it. I was trying to, like, turn my head off camera. Okay, so the Supreme Court has, the state Supreme Court of Utah has blocked marriage for same-sex couples there. Is that correct? I'm talking to my people in the booth. That is correct. So
we can't confirm it.
Well, CNN has confirmed that the state Supreme Court in Utah has blocked same-sex marriages from taking place. And of course, there was a big victory for those who were in favor of same-sex marriage, and now this obviously is a big loss for them, Mark.
Absolutely, and not entirely a shocker. As you know, courts are, as much as they attempt to be impartial and distant, all courts are informed and shaped by the people who appoint them. And so in a state like Utah, it's not entirely a shocker, but it is somewhat moving outside of the stream and the current of the rest of the country, where you see people moving towards same-sex marriage. Marriage equality is probably an inevitability around the country. It's a little bit surprising that Utah is one of the outliers.
All right, Peter Hamdy, Ross Douthat, Marc Lamont Hill, thanks so much for being with me. I appreciate it. And just to reiterate, for those of you who didn't catch it, I'm just going to read it.